Well, hello everyone, and thank you for coming to my talk on sustainability, stewardship, a little bit of the history of the fair, and how it is the fair came into being, and how we continue to put this event on for the past 50 plus years. There was a time when the fair did not manage its land at all. No management whatsoever. That's because we didn't have any land. The first fair was in Eugene at a private property, a peach orchard. And that's how come the peach is our symbol at the fair. That was in 1969. Since then, the next year, we eventually came out and found this spot. This spot used to be an airport for crop dusters. So that's why we have Arrow Road. This is where some of the crop dusters would land, and they would also use it for hay and straw development. It wasn't considered very high quality land because it flooded every year. Just a sec, we have questions at the end if you don't mind. This isn't going to be very long. So eventually though, it became a very, very popular local event, a fundraiser, and that's one of the pillars of sustainability, is the economic benefit that the fair brings to not just the vendors, for food vendors, for the craft vendors, but also we're a nonprofit that donates tens of thousands of dollars every year to the community. We were the major donators to the Elvira School District, to the Fern Ridge School District. We are major donors for very small nonprofits. We give away anywhere from $500 for small grants to over $10,000 for larger grants, and I think the largest one I know of is in the neighborhood of $50,000. We supported the Black Rock protests. We provided support to small groups that don't even have nonprofit status. If you have a good idea and you think you can make it work, then you can come to a board meeting and request money, and they're probably going to listen to you. Maybe they'll give you a few $100s. Maybe they'll tell you to tighten your message up a little bit, but it's a good start. So that brings me to not just the history, but some of the structures in the fair. Right now, the fair has about a dozen paid employees. They range from the executive director, who manages all the day-to-day operations, signs the bills, manages the staff, oversees a lot of the legal issues that we have. We do have our own fair attorney on retainer. We have a separate attorney for land use issues that we go to, because that's a highly specialized sort of law. And sometimes we do have issues. Now, how can this fair happen every year? It's not. This area is not zoned for festivals. It is not zoned for anything other than rural residential and for farmland, mostly, and for forest. Well, that's because we started having this event before zoning even existed in the state of Oregon. So we got grandfathered in. We got very lucky. In 1972, zoning became a big deal. New zoning laws came in, and we wouldn't have been pushed out if it wasn't for that. Now, also what happened in 1972, which is a big deal in the history of the Oregon Country Fair, is that there was a fundraiser for the Springfield Creamery, hosted where the Grateful Dead played, out in what we call Deadlock. And that is still a famous Grateful Dead show. You can see it on YouTube. There's a naked man on a pole dancing, having the grandest time. But that was actually a fundraiser for the creamery, and they're the ones that developed Nancy's yogurt. Believe it or not, that is the first probiotic yogurt to hit the market in the United States. And they started a whole new thing, and it's still very, very successful. Now, what's the connection between the Springfield Creamery and the Oregon Country Fair and the Grateful Dead? Well, that's Ken Kesey. Ken Kesey's sister was the starter of the Springfield Creamery. And he, of course, knew the Grateful Dead, and he was able to arrange for the Dead to come here and play a benefit concert. Well, that set the stage for even more and bigger parties. At that time, we still rented the land, so there wasn't much we could do to really manage it. It was owned by someone else, and it was owned by a corporation that, by and large, leased out the land for different kinds of activities, nothing really particularly impactful. And when I say that, I'm talking about really just over here, the initial 8. That's all we owned, was this area here, and that was black. About 220 acres is what we were renting, and we got to have our event there. It was, of course, much smaller. There was only a few thousand people at the most coming, and the volunteer groups were in the hundreds at the most. Our first volunteer group were the Hodads. And essentially, the Hodads were tree planters. They got their name from the tool that you use to plant trees. It's called a Hodad, and they became de facto security for the Oregon Country Fair. Pretty soon, however, it became apparent that this thing was getting bigger and bigger every year, and we needed more crews. We needed more help every single year. There was also an inordinate and unexpected amount of cash coming into the fair because we sold tickets on site back then. That's when we developed another security crew called the Big Boys. And they now are not really, we don't have any cash on site anymore. Everything is done mostly online, but they still exist as a crew. And they largely are responsible for troublemakers who need a more convincing to not become troublemakers anymore. And they do it very gently, very, very well. They're very, very good at what they do. Other crews that started to be needed are water crew. Of course we need water. Where do we get our water from? Well, there are hundreds of wells all throughout the property that we own. The original 8 had maybe 3 wells. Well water for this many people is not legal, so we could not really count on that. If you're servicing more than 4 households, you need to be inspected and permitted by the EPA, or in this case, the state actually acts as the EPA and will come and inspect your wells. So what we do is we buy our water, and we buy it from the city of Veneta. We buy truckloads of water. The trucks come in constantly all day long. Not only are they supplying the water for our drinking water, they're also supplying all the water for the rinse, all the showers. The only thing we use the wells for now is for irrigation, and that is it. One exception is Doug's Green. Doug's Green is a fairly new acquisition, and that is a house that is right off of Arrow and Chickadee, and that is tested, and that is good well water, and the people that work in there now can use that as drinking water. So then we also ran into sanitation. So as people are drinking a lot of water and they're eating a lot of food, well, what's going to happen with all that waste? The first sort of solution we had was what we call the quads. Nobody likes the quads, right? They're essentially pit toilets that are at main camp and kind of all throughout the fair. But we do have an amazing sanitation crew that keeps them as clean as possible. And they are inspected by the health department, and they are cleaned and done up really, really regularly. However, even that became a little bit not enough. So we developed contracts, first with Bucks. People remember the Bucks back in the day? That was one of the bigger porta potty kind of companies. But we quickly outgrew them. And so now our contract is with Honey Buckets, a much bigger company. And they now take all of our waste. So not only do we buy water from Veneta, we take all our waste to Veneta too. So other trucks come in, the Honey Bucket trucks, and they dump that waste in the water treatment plant that Veneta has. Speaking of water treatment, it's one of my favorite subjects. There was a time, and you can see the map over here, when the far side was owned by the city of Veneta. The city of Veneta, though, needed somewhere to spray their effluent after the sewage is treated, and they decided that our land made more sense for them, and that's the lighter colored orange towards the bottom. We own that. The fair has a real long history of buying any piece of property that comes up for sale anywhere near the fair in order to accommodate things like more people, more parking, more operations areas. So we made a switch. And so now we have the far side, which is camping. We can camp there now. And then we have, Veneta has a place where they can spray their effluent. The effluent is treated, it's not toxic, it's tested all the time. They have state permits, and so far it's been a great partnership. Now I want to come back to the 3 pillars of sustainability. There are 3 essentially that we talk about when we say an event is sustainable. The first we're going to go into is the economic benefits of the fair. Then we're going to go into the social benefits of the fair. And finally, the environmental benefits and responsibilities of the fair. And we're going to just touch on them briefly. We did an economic study about 10 years ago, probably a little longer. And it shows that the fair brings in to Veneta, to Eugene, to Elmira, not into the fair itself, but just into the community, about $1.5 million every year. So that's a big benefit for these rural areas. How much money does the fair generate as far as vendors go? As far as the food vendors, the crafts vendors? That's none of the fair's business. We don't ask anybody how much money they make. That's entirely up to them. And we hope they do really, really well. We do have fees, so vendors do pay fees in order to come here because we have costs. We have about maybe 7,000 volunteers. They don't have to pay, but they do have significant others that often do have to pay for a bracelet, and that's $100. Why do they have to pay? They have to pay because the honey buckets cost a lot of money. I mean, the contract for honey buckets right now alone is almost $100,000 that the fair has to shell out just to deal with our waste. So there are built-in costs that we have to recoup, and it's not. We don't try to make it a moneymaker. It's just something that we do to recoup our costs. Ticket sales are really our bread and butter. Ticket prices have gone up a lot. It used to be that the fare was $5, not all that long ago. Now a one-day pass is $45. Part of the reason is that we decided for the first time ever to limit the number of people that can come to the fair every year. We used to have no limit. The most that I know of was about 22,000 people on one day, just paying visitors. You put about 15,000 volunteers and their significant others and their kids on top of that, and you're looking at pushing 40,000 people on this site on the 8th. That is not sustainable. We found out pretty quickly. It was a cattle car situation going through the 8th. Really, really hard. So I think a decision was made. I was not privy to the discussions, but in order to be able to maximize revenue, still be reasonable, still be the cheapest festival on the West Coast or the East Coast, yep. We raised the rates in order to have limits on the number of participants. And so now we're only allowing about 15,000 people in for paying participants. And of course, it's still a bargain at $45. You get a lot of entertainment that's all free as you're walking around. Well, not free, you paid. But you also get to see all the crafts. You get to see all the food is amazing, and everything so far has worked out really well. So the economic benefits of the fair are really phenomenal. There's a lot of folks who make a solid living, or at least a good part of their living, just by vending at the Oregon Country Fair. And a lot of those folks, even if they only make $2,000 at the fair, a lot of them are living pretty close to the bone. And that $2,000 goes a long way. and it's a very big part of their economy. So, what are the social benefits of the fair? We talk about the fair as being an arts and entertainment organization, that we are trying to live an artful life. Now, as my friend Tripper will point out, artful actually means deceptive, as in the Artful Dodger, but we like it as a word because we're arty, we're artsy, right? So we're promoting a lifestyle, an alternative culture, the kind of art that you really don't see represented very well in the mainstream world. We're promoting a lifestyle of peace, of trying to get along, of promoting the anti-corporate, anti-capitalist, pro-human aspects of what it is to be part of this great planet. So that's a huge part of our social benefit, is that we're not anachronistic. We are cutting edge now. Sure, some of our motifs, like tie-dyes, have been around now for 50 years. So what? It's really that we're pushing the envelope and continue to on being leaders in our community, or local communities especially, to be able to promote peace and prosperity, equality for all, and to make things fair. Now, finally, we have the environmental impact that the fair has. Now, believe it or not, nothing here is natural. It has not been natural for over 10,000 years. And that's how long the Kalapuya, God bless them, have been around. They were we don't know what they were called 10,000 years ago, but the most recent iteration of their name were the Kalapuya. And when we finally did start to, when white people really started to colonize this area, their numbers had been crushed by disease, mostly smallpox, things like that. So while they once numbered in the tens of thousands, they were down to several hundred Kalapuya still existing. They were such a small number that they did not qualify to be their own federally recognized tribe, and are actually now part of the Grand Ronde. Nonetheless, this is their land, and we need to acknowledge that, and to say that, thank you so much for doing what you did as a Kalapuya to make us able to put on this event. The particular group of Kalapuya that were here were the sub-tribe, the Chalamela, and that's where we get the name Chalamela from, for the field over there. Archaeology is critical to the fair's success and to the fair's existence. In the 1980s, a highway was about to be put straight through our fair property. Ann Rogers is a rock star archaeologist. If you ever get a chance to go to Art Park and talk to Ann, please do. She discovered remains of the Kalapuya that go back 10,000 years, mostly camas ovens, that are along the bank of the Long Tom. Camas was a very important food source for the Kalapuya, and it still grows in our fields behind us. They managed the land by burning it, and that would promote camas growth, and it would keep down the smaller shrubs that could outcompete camas. They'd harvest the camas, they would bake it in these ovens, and as the Long Tom meanders and grows and moves, the bank moves, it starts to expose these ovens. And so you can see them, if you know what you're looking for, along the banks of the Long Tom, because there's like a charred area that's existed somehow for 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 5,000 years. The oldest carbon dating we have is over 10,000 years old.
Wow.
Now this area right here where we are, this is a land of alluvial deposits. And so you won't find a lot of artifacts here until you dig about a foot deep, because that's how often the fair floods, how often the Long Tom floods, and it's been leaving layers and layers of soil on top. So despite that, we do not dig at the Oregon Country Fair without first talking to our archaeologists. Absolutely critical. They need to be there. Every post hole, every single one, has an archaeologist there watching it. We still don't find a whole heck of a lot of artifacts here. There is a map that management is privy to. We don't advertise it to the public, neither do many other jurisdictions, because we don't want people digging for arrowheads or for flint. We don't want to tell people exactly where we found this stuff, because it just causes people to want to go looking for it. And once you disturb that area, the purveyance of that site is destroyed. And that means that we want to know exactly where it was found, in what layer, and that way we can date it accurately and have a better sense of what it is. So that's just one of the ways that we try to steward this land. Another way is that we try to keep it as natural as possible. So I told you earlier that there's nothing natural here. Well, maybe overstating it a little bit. The fact is that the fair alone is a massive impact to the landscape. Just having the fair is huge. When I was a naturalist in New England, we did a study looking at, is it better to have dispersed camping in wilderness, or is it better to have concentrated camping in wilderness? It became apparent that when you have dispersed camping, over 80% of the ecological damage is done by setting up that first camp. 80%. And that takes a long time to come back. As a result, especially in New England, and it's catching on in the West, you see a lot less dispersed camping being approved and a lot more concentrated camping, so that you're just heavily impacting the one area while protecting the other areas. And that's kind of what happens here. So we do have huge amounts of impacts on the 8. We try to mitigate them as best we can. But the 8, the Long Tom is a living, dynamic river. It does not do what we want it to do. It does what it wants to do. And as you can see, when you head up north, that river is carving away huge chunks of the bank, and we're having to move around quite a bit. We'll work around it. You know, that's what we always did. We have some areas, about 10% of the fair, they're called over here the unorganized territory, the woods, that is more or less left alone. Now, being completely left alone does not necessarily mean that it's natural, because there are still a lot of invasive species that are getting in there. There's invasive species right behind us, blackberry, that we have to tear out all the time. So it is a difficult thing, but one of the things that can happen, if you tell people it's okay to start tearing out what they think is an invasive species, they might be wrong. So we have a process of informing one of the crews called the Vegmatics, and their vegetation management, and they will come to your campsite and tell you, yes, it's okay to cut that. No, we really don't want you to cut that. So it's sort of a negotiation that a lot of the campsites have in order to make sure that we're doing the best we can. We do not allow any outside materials, any outside dirt to be brought in. Everything is pretty much generated on site. Now this brings us to something that is, if not an existential crisis for the fair, certainly something that's going to impact us greatly. And that is that there has been reported in south of Portland, and it's on its way here, an invasive species of beetle called the emerald ash borer. Ash trees in Asia are not affected by it. They evolve together. So those ash trees in Asia secrete a chemical that slows down the growth of the larva to such a point that the tree can outcompete it. It grows very, very fast. Our ash trees, the famous Oregon ash, has no such ability to do that. And all throughout, from the East Coast to the Midwest, and now on the West Coast, ash trees are being destroyed. White ash is gone, and black ash, Oregon ash, is also going to be heavily impacted. One of the reasons why you may not have heard about it is because Oregon ash is not considered a commercially important tree. we're a Doug fir country. We are cedar. Those are our two major trees for really generating income around here. Unfortunately, what that also means is that we don't have mills that can handle hardwoods in Oregon, where there's one in Eugene. But 60% at least of our biomass all throughout this fair is black ash. That is a lot. All of those trees are going to die, probably within about 10 years. So it's going to be a dramatic effect on our landscape. I want to assure you, though, that our land use management planning team and our subgroup, the Emerald Ash Borers team, not Emerald Ash Borers, are looking very, very hard and very, very close at what it is we can do to mitigate, get ahead of it, and start to plant trees that may be more appropriate, trees that will, if we plant them now, maybe in 10 or 20 years will start to give us the shade we want, and it's going to take that long. But I would like to point out, though, that the earliest fair years here, people remember sunshine, not shade. You know, so there was a time when the fair started, 50 years ago on this property, when we did have quite a bit of open areas, quite a bit of shade. And so I don't think it's going to be as impactful for the event as people are worried about. What we do need to worry about is safety. These trees start to fail, they become brittle. People are camping under them. Marshall's is full of them. Marshall's Landing. The 8 is full of them. As those trees become brittle, the limbs start to fall, they become dangerous. We really need to watch out. So we're coming up with a plan to prioritize what trees we're going to need to proactively take down one at a time. And eventually, though, there will come a time where we'll probably have to rope off areas because they're too dangerous, because we just don't have the resources to be able to cut down all those trees at once. What are we going to do with all that wood? Now, some of it can be milled. We will be milling some of it. We'll be making it available for crafters. It'll make great firewood, but one of the things that we're looking into is pyrolysis. So pyrolysis is a process where you essentially cook the wood at about 600 degrees centigrade. It becomes essentially what we call biochar, and to a lesser extent, a fuel. And that biochar is inert carbon. So it locks the carbon in, and we can put that right into the ground all throughout here, and that will help mitigate any of the carbon footprint issues that us having to manage this disaster is going to have. So, I don't want to end on a bad note, though. One of the best things that we have going for us are our volunteers. I am fully confident that once we put out a call for help, that once we really get the message across about what this impact to the fair is going to be, folks are going to step up and they are going to be ready to help us manage this property far more proactively than we ever have had to before. And that's one of the best things about this fair family, is that we do step up and we do work together when we have to. There are times when we don't. But by and large, when the chips are down, we've shown in the 80s, when the DEA cracked down on us, we got it together. And we got together and we said, okay, what we used to do isn't going to happen anymore. We are now a drug and alcohol-free event, and that's it, period. And that went well into the 90s, where it really solidified as one of the mantras of the fair. And look at what we have. We're still extremely popular. How many festivals without beer gardens are popular? One, as far as I know. It's us. So our message has been that we can work with local authorities, with the federal authorities, because our volunteers are there, and some of them are rock stars. We have Dennis Todd, who is a rock star of a biologist, an environmentalist, a professor at the University of Oregon. We have Ann Rogers, whose gravitas in archaeology cannot be overstated. We have other professionals working with us to help manage it. We have Floyd Krasansky, who's a state senator, and he works with, and he's fair family. He's part of the management team. And you know how we had a problem, I don't know if you heard, but we had a problem with LTD this year. The buses, they said we couldn't really do it because there's a law that was passed during the Bush administration. Floyd stepped in, and oh, lo and behold, they figured out a way to do it. So it's nice to have that kind of ability to actually reach out to friends of the fair to help us get this event happening every year. Well, I think I touched on the 3 pillars of sustainability as best I can. May have went into the weeds a little bit too much, so if you do have any questions, I'm glad to ask them to the best of my ability.